Thank you for joining our presentation today. I hope you enjoy our content on the Grand Canyon, natural wonder and cultural phenomenon here from Northern Arizona. We just want to give thanks to Coventry, to NAU, the Center for International Education, as well as Angelina for inviting us to do this. We also want to give what's called a formal land acknowledgement. Northern Arizona University sits at the base of the San Francisco Peaks on homelands sacred to Native Americans throughout the region. We honor their past, present, and future generations who have lived here for millennia and will forever call this place home. So that's our acknowledgement of where we are situated in the world. My name's Ted Martinez. I am the director of a semester-long program here called Grand Canyon Semester. And I wanted to say my first experience with the Grand Canyon occurred in college when I came out to this region. I had never visited here, and I came to this region, and as a college student went to the Grand Canyon, and it's a very special place. Hopefully you'll see by the end of the semester, and a very transformational experience.
Hello, my name is Peter Runge, and I am the head of Special Collections and Archives here at the Cline Library on the campus of Northern Arizona University. And I have not, well, prior to coming to Northern Arizona, I had not visited the Grand Canyon. I grew up and was raised in a different area of the United States. And I was overwhelmed the first time I saw the Grand Canyon, and I continue to be overwhelmed every time I visit it. And I just feel very fortunate to be able to not only work with colleagues connected to the Grand Canyon, but also to visit the Grand Canyon pretty much whenever I want to.
Good morning. My name is Sean Evans. I work for Peter. I'm an archivist here at Cline Library, Northern Arizona University. My experience with the Grand Canyon has been pretty much that of the tourist. And it began years ago as we drove out from New York every year to visit Arizona. And it continues right up until today. Being so close to the Grand Canyon is a huge gift. And being able to visit it as someone now interested in history is a pretty wonderful experience.
Right, thank you to my co-presenters. Excuse me. So here's our first slide. We want to ask you to get involved by making a mental image of the Grand Canyon. What do you see in your mind's eye when you think of it? What literal things are there? What images come to mind? Also think of, where did you gather those images in your mind? Was it a movie you saw? Is it purely your imagination? Did you visit it maybe and take your own pictures? So if you can, take a moment, and I think we'll monitor the chat. We won't delay too long, but I think Peter and Angelina will look in, and we'll give your responses as we continue. So yes, make those mental images. But also throughout the presentation, of course, we encourage you to consider the UN sustainability goals, your itinerary for travel, and how this fits into your understanding of this global curriculum that you're studying as we share our content on the Grand Canyon. All right, we'll move along. I think we'll get back to those responses later. All right, so there's an enormous challenge to present something with the enormity of the Grand Canyon. So there's many ways to think about it, and so here are some of them. It is a natural resource, of course. So there is geology within the Grand Canyon. Maybe obviously there is a river at the bottom called the Colorado River. There is ecology, the habitat, the species that are contained there. There are also cultural resources. So there is archaeology, as well as living culture. It's important to know that, to keep in mind that the indigenous people of the region are still here. They're very vibrant, very present. So those cultures are still present on the land. Although we see evidence of the cultures in the past, it does not in any sense mean that the cultures are gone. They're still very present. And then so we have to represent the history, the varied histories of the region, from the indigenous cultures to the settler populations who had a large influence in the area, to what today we might call the adventure enthusiasts, which is a very big thing. People whitewater raft through the canyon. It's extremely exciting. It's life-threatening and life-affirming. People do these extended runs. They hike and run through the canyon. It's just amazing. So there are people out there who adventure through the area. And then also stakeholder groups. So of course there are conservationists conserving natural resources. There are still extractive industries around the Grand Canyon. So despite its many federal protections, it does face threats from uranium mining. We have 6 million annual visitors to the national park and 40 million downstream water users. And so what that refers to is the water that flows through the canyon is actually used as municipal water supplies for many large cities in the US, including Phoenix, Tucson, and in California, San Diego. So a lot of constituency groups there. I'm going to turn over the slides to my colleagues to present you some more.
This is a little introduction to Northern Arizona University. NAU began as a teacher's college way back in 1899, and it was established while Arizona was just a territory. Flagstaff, the city where Northern Arizona University is, was not the biggest town in Northern Arizona, but because Lowell Observatory had been founded here in 1894, there was some push to actually have a scientific or educational facility in Flagstaff. And so Northern Arizona Normal School, a teacher's college, was founded here. So you can see the comparison of Old Main in those two photographic images. You can also see our 1966 emblem that was created upon becoming a university. And you can see the mountains and the trees and all that good stuff, the symbols of Arizona in that symbol. In the lower right is an image of Dr. Agnes Allen, who was our geology instructor from the 40s well into the 1960s, who took advantage of our location here in Northern Arizona to take students to Sunset Crater, into the Grand Canyon, and to Oak Creek Canyon to visit these natural wonders and lay out the sort of geological and historical and biological and all the things that they could see right up close and in person. So that's kind of the NAU introduction I'd like to leave you with.
Great, thanks, Sean. I saw in the chat that people are coming from all over the world and may have varying familiarities with the geographic layout of the United States and where the Grand Canyon is situated. So I'd like to start by situating the Grand Canyon geographically within the United States. The Grand Canyon is located in a region of America known as the Colorado Plateau. On the map, on the left-hand side of the slide here, the Colorado Plateau is denoted in green. So it's in the American Southwest, and it's a huge uprising of land that rises between 1,500 and 4,000 meters above sea level. And unlike the lower regions of the American Southwest, the plateau is marked by 4 full seasons. So we do get snow. We have deciduous trees, mountains, as well as a very diverse ecological and geological systems that reside here. It's the high desert, essentially. It's a little bit different from the low desert, which I think most people associate with the Southwest. It's also a culturally important region, as Ted mentioned earlier. The Colorado Plateau is the ancestral home to scores of indigenous communities, and this area is considered sacred as many origin stories evolve out of the Colorado Plateau. The Colorado Plateau also serves as the geographic boundary for Special Collections and Archives collecting scope. So we collect, preserve, and make available the human and natural history of the Colorado Plateau, with an emphasis on the southwest corner of the plateau. So if you look at that map on the right-hand side of the slide, The Four Corners region is where Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah meet. So our collecting scope emphasizes the southwest corner of the plateau that crosses through northern Arizona and southern Utah. We're biased, of course, but we feel this is the most fascinating part of the plateau, as it includes the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River, numerous ancestral and current indigenous communities, a major transcontinental railway, and Route 66. In addition to these features, our collections capture history related to science, water, forestry, land use and sustainability, and Western expansion. Of late, we've been actively seeking to document diverse voices and perspectives in the region, including several ethnic demographics. So many of our collections connect directly and indirectly to the United Nations sustainability goals, such as clean water, quality education, economic growth, reduced inequality, sustainable cities and communities, and life on land.
Okay, Grand Canyon Natural Wonder. What does that mean? Well, the Grand Canyon is 8 million years old. It's carved by the Colorado River. The rate of the erosion is approximately the thickness of a pen stroke on an annual basis. So regardless of how you look at the canyon, it's an ancient thing. The Grand Canyon is one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. It became probably what would be called the anchor national park for the new National Park Service at the turn of the last century. It was founded as a park in 1909. It just celebrated its centennial. One of the largest and most visited national parks in the whole National Park Service system, with over 6 million visitors every year on average. So that describes the park, and I think some of the tension around the fact that while the park itself, or the canyon itself, is ancient, the park itself, the modern entity that is Grand Canyon National Park, is incredibly young by comparison. The maps in this tile represent the very first comprehensive effort to survey the Grand Canyon. They were surveyed. The 2 maps, when put together, of course, make 1 map, but we have 2 there. The maps were surveyed by Francois Mathis and Richard Evans during the period of 1912 through 1914. And it took them nearly 10 years to actually translate the data they gathered and to create the map. It took a little longer for the map to be published. It was ultimately published in 1927. So again, this tension between the ancient and the modern, we don't have the first complete map of the Grand Canyon until 1927. All the maps that showed the Grand Canyon prior to that were obviously incomplete and relied upon informed speculation, partial information, and sometimes just good guessing.
Great. The Grand Canyon National Park, as Sean just mentioned, celebrated its centennial as a designated national park on February 26, 2019. In preparation for the celebration, Northern Arizona University partnered with one of our sister state universities, Arizona State University, and the Grand Canyon National Park to develop a collaborative portal of the early Grand Canyon history. We called the project the 100 Years of Grand. The project captures the history of the Grand Canyon from 1890 to 1940, which marks the time frame of the canyon's history from kind of this free-for-all state to its designation as a national park, and then the first 2 decades under federal management. The project enabled the 3 institutions to digitize nearly 4,000 unique items, making them available via our respective digital archives, as well as this story map portal. We focused on several key themes and topical areas such as exploration, mining and natural resource extraction, tourism, politics, and indigenous communities. 2 of the UN sustainable goals this project touches on are economic growth and life on land. The link to the 100 Years of Grand project, the story map that is, will be provided by Coventry University, but I've also included the URL at the bottom of the slide there. So if you're interested, we encourage you to explore that site a little bit more.
Okay, Grand Canyon water and dams. And one of the things I want to mention as we throw these images around is all of the images you're seeing here come from collections that we house here in special collections and archives. So dams, in order to manage the Colorado River, the United States Bureau of Reclamation built 13 dams along the 1,400 miles, river miles of the Colorado River from the source all the way to its terminus. Two of the largest dams along the Colorado River are the Glen Canyon Dam on the left and Hoover Dam on the right. The Glen Canyon Dam was completed in 1963 and lies on the eastern side of the Grand Canyon and creates Lake Powell behind it. The Hoover Dam was completed in 1936 and resides at the western end of the Grand Canyon and creates Lake Mead. The dams help the federal government effectively manage water allotments, again, emphasizing that the Colorado River is an active river that supplies water to 7 western states. They also have hydropower capability and do create electricity for cities in the Southwest. The dams also have an effect on the ecology and the culture of the region of the Grand Canyon. Many of our collections in special collections and archives document the Colorado River, the Grand Canyon, and Glen Canyon, north of Grand Canyon, before and after the installation of the dams. The collections allow scientists and historians, researchers, scholars, and students to understand and interpret much of the change that has occurred over the last 84 years.
Great. And I just want to underscore something that Sean mentioned just previously, and that's that the content that Sean and I are sharing are coming from our collection. So everything that you see here is coming from Special Collections and Archives at the Cline Library. And so I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about science and exploration in the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon and the Colorado River have obviously attracted a lot of scientists and explorers ever since John Wesley Powell went down the Colorado River in 1869. Here in this slide, we have an example of science and exploration coming together at the same time. In 1937, the California Institute of Technology sent a small group of scientists down the Colorado River to study the geology of the Grand Canyon. At the same time, a 23-year-old gas station attendant from Oregon named Buzz Holstrom wanted to run the Colorado River, but without experience or anyone to vouch for his abilities, he wasn't able to attach himself to any river trips. He was especially interested in serving as a boatman on this particular science expedition, although his application was denied. He didn't let this dissuade or discourage him. He decided to build his own boat and run the entire length of the Colorado River solo, a journey of over 2,200 river kilometers that took him 26 days to complete. Along the way, he caught up with and met the geologists on the California Institute of Technology trip. The moment was captured in their respective journals and photographs. On the left-hand side of the slide, we see a photograph of Buzz meeting up with the geologist just above Diamond Creek, which is on the western arm of the Grand Canyon. And on the right, the same moment is captured in one of the scientists' doggerel log, which is an informal or kind of humorous account of the trip. And at the end of the trip, Buzz became the first person to run the length of the Colorado River solo and the 10th party through the Grand Canyon. The California Institute of Technology scientists were the 4th scientific trip through the Grand Canyon, the first being the Powell expedition in 1869. Not only was Buzz the first person to run the Colorado River solo, this was also the first time that 2 river trips met on the river. Nowadays, if you go down the river on a river trip, you're bound to meet people on a regular basis. Special Collections and Archives houses both of these collections, and the Caltech trip connects to the UN sustainability goal of clean water and sanitation, as much of the work that they did on that trip laid the foundation for future dam projects in the Grand Canyon. And by the way, if you're interested in learning more about Buzz and his incredible journey down the Colorado River and his mysterious death later in his life, please read the book, The Doing of the Thing by Brad Dimmick.
Okay. Very much apart from scientific exploration, we're going to talk a little bit about tourism. And if you're talking about tourism at the Grand Canyon, you've got to talk about the Fred Harvey Company. Fred Harvey was an actual person. He's from England, was from England. He emigrated in 1854 and is primarily known for developing the concept for fast, good food in chain restaurants for railroads. At the time, in the 1850s and 60s and 70s and so on, trains had to stop so people could eat. And so it was important for scheduling and all kinds of things that restaurants be able to handle large volumes of people. So initially, Fred Harvey set up an agreement with the Santa Fe Railway, and he expanded his business along the railroad tracks, building restaurants and ultimately hotels. And by the 1920s, his company is building destination resorts. With the arrival of the Santa Fe Railway, their Grand Canyon line, at the south rim of the Grand Canyon in 1901, the Grand Canyon kind of officially is part of the tourism Southwest travel destination. Literally anyone traveling by railroad between Chicago and Los Angeles was able to go to the Grand Canyon. This would be augmented in 1926 with the establishment of Route 66, which basically paralleled the Santa Fe Railway. This is notable, I think, because the Park Service did not get to the Grand Canyon before entities like the Fred Harvey Company. Fred Harvey Company was able to acquire properties at the rim. They built the famous El Tovar Hotel, plus a lot of other rim area infrastructure that people are so familiar with: Hermit's Rest, the Desert View Watchtower, Bright Angel Lodge, Hopi House, Phantom Ranch at the bottom of the canyon, and so on. The Fred Harvey Company then basically had a lock at the Grand Canyon, and through contractual agreements with the National Park Service, really was the single entity that provided tourists with room and board, food service, curios, interesting things to see and do, including mule rides into the canyon, daily native dances, tours based from the Grand Canyon to other locations. The Fred Harvey Company basically then defines the Southwest for the traveling tourist, not just American tourists, obviously, but anyone who made their way to the Grand Canyon experienced the Fred Harvey Company. This definition, however, included the interpretation and use of Native American symbology, beliefs, and languages. And so, whether intentionally or unintentionally, the Fred Harvey Company creates this kind of overarching culture for travel destinations in the Southwest, like the Grand Canyon. The imagery on this tile includes the El Tovar Hotel in the center upper part. Below that is Hopi House. To the right is the Native American interpretation, the Desert Watchtower. Below that is the ceremonial opening of the Watchtower, complete with Native American symbols and prayers and all kinds of things. In the lower left-hand portion of the screen, you've got an advertisement for the Harvey Tours, the Indian Detours. And my favorite item is in the upper left, a painting that hung in the bar at the El Tovar that depicts cowboys with beer bottles instead of guns. It's a very nice image. It was part of W. Dean Fawcett's 7 Stages of Intoxication.
Great, thanks, Sean. All right, women and river running in the Grand Canyon. These are 2 of my favorite collections. In 1938, 2 women, Lois Jotter-Cutter and her academic advisor, Dr. Elzada Clover from the University of Michigan, set out to study the riparian flora along the Colorado River. Initially, they intended to use pack animals to hike repeatedly from the rim to the river as they progressed downriver. This would have been an arduous and time-consuming process. Anyone who's visited the Grand Canyon knows that there are no easy ways in and out of the Grand Canyon. So they reached out to a gentleman by the name of Norm Nevels, a guide who lived in Mexican Hat, Utah, which is not too far from the Grand Canyon and the Colorado River. And Norm was willing to take the botanists into the canyon using pack animals, but proposed a more efficient approach using boats to travel down the Colorado River to collect the data. So Lois and her mentor, Elzada, agreed and made the necessary arrangements and payments to secure Norm's services as their boatman and river guide through the Grand Canyon. With money in hand, Norm had the small task of quickly building a couple of boats to take the group down the river, which he did using scrap wood. Ultimately, the trip was successful, both in terms of collecting botanical data, but also making it safely through the Grand Canyon. And by the time the trip ended, 2 firsts had taken place. Norm Nevels led the first commercial river trip through the Grand Canyon, and Lois and Elzada had become the first 2 women to successfully run the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon, doing so in 43 days. Norm Nevels quickly became a celebrity and started what would eventually become a lucrative business of commercial river running through the Grand Canyon, which is still a booming business today. This connects directly to the sustainability goal of economic growth. And then Lois and Elzada were less concerned with their notoriety, as their principal purpose was really to collect botanical data. However, historians of the Grand Canyon and the Colorado River hold their accomplishment in high regard. This successful trip broke an important gender barrier that had been attempted many times in the past, but unsuccessfully so. And that served to kind of fuel the speculation that the Colorado River was too dangerous for women to run. Lois and Elzada proved otherwise. The collections of both Norm Nevels and Lois Shutter Cutter reside in SCA and include extensive documentation, not only on this trip, but their respective careers that followed.
Indigenous perspectives. There are 22 federally recognized Native nations inside the state of Arizona. Of those, at least 11 of them consider the Grand Canyon to be part of their ancestral lands. And so while there may be no ownership or overlap or anything that actually grants the Grand Canyon to anyone but the Havasupai and the Wallapai, perhaps, who live at the southern boundary. Other groups like the Navajo and the Ute and the Hopi and the Yavapai and Yavapai Apache and the Zuni all look to the canyon as being part of their homelands. And really, this is not abnormal in Arizona. The San Francisco Peaks, Spider Rock, other places in Arizona form a core of native sacredness or belief in sacredness in the landscape. So this map clearly shows the outline of the state of Arizona and kind of the geographical location, or at least affiliation of these native tribes. And it's an interesting map because the reservations themselves don't really look like that. And so it points to a number of cultural problems and differences between current political boundaries and traditional and historic native boundaries. The canyon itself, of course, aside from being ancient, there is evidence in the canyon for thousands of years of native occupation. Many of the materials, the archaeological remnants, are ascribed to people whose names essentially this culture made up. And so we have kind of the contemporary native populations on this map. The historic ones, of course, we don't know. The material in the canyon that's been found and housed and documented at a number of museums, but of course, also including the Grand Canyon National Park Service Museum at the rim, date back thousands of years and were remarkably well preserved. This is partially because of at least the remoteness of the Grand Canyon, the difficulty of navigating in the canyon, and the climate and the actual physical shelter that the canyon provided for a lot of these archaeological materials. So this map is just something to chew on and think about in relation to how Arizona and the Southwest actually looks today.
Cool. Well, Special Collections and Archives has numerous collections that either directly or indirectly document early indigenous activity in the Grand Canyon. On the left-hand side of the slide here is an image from a collection, the Mary K. Allen collection, and it's a photograph of the Red Deer Rock Art site in the Grand Canyon. Mary K. Allen was a river runner who had a keen interest in rock art. She spent years investigating and documenting rock art in the Grand Canyon as she was running the rivers, and is credited with identifying a previously unknown type of rock art called Grand Canyon polychrome. Her collection of field notes, reports, writings, and photographs are housed in Special Collections and Archives, and this collection documents the extensive range of travel and activity of indigenous people in the Grand Canyon going back thousands of years. In some ways, we've been talking about, in this presentation, we've been talking about the relative recent history of the Grand Canyon, but these collections drive home the fact that indigenous people have been traveling through the Grand Canyon for thousands of years prior to Anglos even setting foot in the United States of America. The Special Collections and Archives also has numerous collections that document non-tribal or Anglo contact with indigenous communities connected to the Grand Canyon. An example is the photograph on the right-hand side of the slide taken by George Wharton James, who was an early travel writer in the late 19th and early 20th century. He was an early promoter of the Grand Canyon as a tourist destination. During his travels in the Grand Canyon, he photographed several of the indigenous communities and their peoples. Here on the right is a photograph of a young Havasupai woman holding a woven basket. The Havasupai Reservation is actually within the boundaries of the Grand Canyon National Park. And although a product of conventions and sensibilities of his time, George Wharton James frequently posed Native Americans and romanticized them as objects of curiosity and intrigue. Our collections documenting Native American peoples' activities in land help us better understand the need to reduce inequality. Further, as a means of supporting this goal, these collections documenting early contact are being reappraised through the lens of what's called the Protocols for Native American Archival Materials, which Sean's going to talk about in just a moment.
The Protocols for Native American Archival Materials were created here at NAU by our predecessors here in Special Collections and Archives. They were created with representatives from Arizona Native tribes, from First Nation representatives in Canada, and even tribal representatives from as far away as Australia. Their goal was to craft a way for archives like ours that had come into possession of materials that included knowledge, images, perspectives of Native American peoples. Obviously, things like archaeological and anthropological field notes were the focus of these sorts of things. But there were lots and lots of other things, motion picture images, photographs, and other things that depicted Native people and were interpreted by, well, the anthropologist, the photographer, the archivist. And this sets up kind of an automatic problem where you have one culture kind of freely reinterpreting or interpreting the other. So the goal of the protocols was to set up a mechanism by which archives, museums, libraries, people in possession of this material could consult the protocols and use the protocols as a means of opening lines of communications with colleagues and representatives of Native tribes to essentially come to a good understanding and a way of either appropriately displaying or making materials available, sometimes changing storage methods and putting on restrictions up to and including actually repatriating material to Native tribal entities. Peter, what What can you add to this?
I think you covered it really well, Sean. I just think that the important thing to underscore here is that NAU leans heavily on the protocols to ensure treating the history and the culture of the indigenous communities, not only connected to the Grand Canyon, but more broadly across the Southwest region with the utmost cultural respect and dignity. And so in many ways, NAU and some of the other institutions in the Southwest are the leaders in implementing the protocols for Native American archival materials. And it's something we as an institution are very proud of.
Indeed.
Right. So we want to share with you one way that NAU has risen to this challenge, in addition to what my colleagues have stated. NAU rises to the challenge to perform education and outreach on the Grand Canyon, and sees it as a learning opportunity. And so I want to share a short video from the program which I direct called Grand Canyon Semester. And we invite you to view this and to join us if that is the case. It is an academic program. You can get academic credit. It is a full semester length program of 17 units. And it is open to applications from around the world and around the country. Oh, look, here we go. All right, we're there. All right, so hopefully you'll be able to view and hear the audio in this 2-minute video documentation of the Grand Canyon semester.
Grand Canyon semester experience is empowering.
It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
It was life-changing.
The Grand Canyon is super rad. Being just in this place, it's almost magical.
The Grand Canyon semester completely transformed my life in such a positive way.
It's also an opportunity for us to test our intellect, to become curious, to find passion in things, whether it's the geology or the cultural history or really the current politics and how this place is playing out in the landscape of our human culture.
The canyon and the land is the teacher. The faculty are just facilitators to the learning. This landscape has a lot to teach people, and so we try to work with the landscape as much as possible to bring out the lessons for the students. But the lessons are there and the land is teaching. We're just helping.
Well, we begin with really creating an awareness that the Grand Canyon itself is not just a geological landscape, it's not just a biological landscape, but it's a really important cultural landscape.
We focus on trying to understand why the landscapes around here look the way they do from a social and an ecological and a political perspective.
I would highly recommend the Grand Canyon semester to any major, from the arts to the sciences to the humanities.
It has something that everyone can take home.
It's just an experience that can feed any mindset.
The Grand Canyon semester program is just an amazing experience.
These kinds of experiences, there's no replacement for them. There's nothing like them.
I love Grand Canyon semester.
I love Grand Canyon semester.
I love Grand Canyon semester.
All right. Just switch over here again. Let's see. So hopefully you can see that at NAU we rise to the challenge to use to sort of do outreach and education on the Grand Canyon, and so that is program that we offer here, learning program. All right, I think here is a slide we want to start to wrap up with. And what it does is it provides current Indigenous voices. We've talked about the history of the Grand Canyon, how people have occupied it for millennia, and also hopefully made clear that those people are still here on the landscape, very much so. And so here are representatives of two Indigenous tribes, one being the Navajo tribe and the other being the Hopi tribe. So one more time, we have two short videos to share. Let's see.
I remember stepping on the boat and floating down the Colorado River and how at home I felt. I'm the first Navajo woman to be licensed as a commercial river guide and a full-time river guide for about 13 years. But on the river, I was always instructed to make offerings every day of corn pollen or white cornmeal, and to ensure that the river knew that I was respecting him and her. In the Dene way, the big Colorado River is considered the male river. The little Colorado River that comes out and the San Juan River, they're all considered the female rivers. And where the waters come together, the confluence, so that's kind of like where the male and female meet. Together they nourish the rest of the Grand Canyon. It's just a very sacred place that we must treat very carefully, respectfully, and not think of it as a theme park.
Okay, so that was a voice from Nikki Cooley, a Navajo woman who has been a commercial river guide and had the responsibility of leading trips and tourism through the Grand Canyon while balancing and understanding her traditional heritage and the sacredness of the canyon. And so along those lines, we have one more voice from a Hopi elder who will hopefully show some of the spiritual relationship that the people currently still have with the canyon.
The Grand Canyon has a spirit. They say that we emerge from the Grand Canyon. The place called Sipapuni, which is the trail to the underworld. And then from there we emerge into this present world. And eventually we will travel into the spiritual world. And when that happens, our spirit travels to the Grand Canyon, particularly around the area of the confluence. And that is a home for our ancestral people and their spirits. And from the Grand Canyon, the spirits travel throughout the world as clouds. So every day they are with us. So I hope that the visitors will share that kind of feeling, that the Grand Canyon and humanity are all one.
All right, here is a list of our resources on your screen that we use and you can link to. And here are our contact emails if you wish to reach out to us with additional questions. If we can provide any more resources, link you to information and local resources. And I think we are concluding and we are inviting questions. And if there are any themes my colleagues can share from the chat about the image of the Grand Canyon and whether that image has changed.
Ted, if you want to stop sharing so we can get everyone on the, there we go. Excellent. Well, first, we would love to invite everyone to come and explore the Grand Canyon and Northern Arizona region. There's so much to offer even beyond the canyon. And hopefully you've learned a little bit through your itinerary that Coventry has put together on the Moodle. And yeah, as questions come up, just let us know.
Yeah, thank you thank you very much. That was really interesting presentation today. I would love to go. It just looks absolutely breathtaking, in all honesty. And I can see from the comments that there's a number of people that are thanking the team for the information given today and are very interested in joining the Grand Canyon experience. So yeah, fantastic. If anyone's got any specific questions they'd like to unmute or put them in the chat, please feel free to do so.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is, when this finally ends, not gonna address the elephant in the room, but if we actually get to go to the US and to the Grand Canyon, what would be your recommendation? Like, should we spend a day there? Should we spend 2 days there? If there are any specific routes that we need to follow in order to, you know, kind of see those indigenous people that you were talking about, maybe even have, if it's possible, any some kind of conversation with them, because there are so many books out there about, you know, about that region. And I don't know, it's just so fascinating to me. And I think that if I would go there, I would really like to kind of participate in the conversation.
I'll start, and then I'm sure Sean and Peter can add as well. I would give the Grand Canyon more than 1 day for sure. Their statistics on the average visit is less than 15 minutes at the rim looking in, and then people get in their car and go. And that seems like a shame for us who live in the area. So so definitely more than 1 day would be my recommendation. I'll add 2 more things. One is that there are cultural representatives within the canyon who are there sometimes to perform dances, and you can engage with those people there at the canyon. And guys, correct me if I'm wrong, I do believe there is a village, Monkopi, that is open to the public. Monkopi, I believe, is a Hopi village that is open to the public. So some of these places, some villages usually have signage out front. They'll be very clear if they do not welcome your visiting. These are, you know, obviously private places of residence, but I do believe Monkopi has a sign that says you're welcome to enter, and then just has rules and protocols about how to act once within the village. Okay, guys, if you have anything to add.
Sure, I would just reiterate what Ted said. If you can spend more than 1 day at the Grand Canyon, please do so. It's really hard to take in as much of it as possible in a day. It is a sad statistic that most people just spend 15 minutes at the rim looking into the Grand Canyon and then proceed to move on. Me personally, some of my favorite areas of the Grand Canyon include the North Rim, which is on the opposite side. So when most people come to visit the Grand Canyon, they come into what's called the Grand Canyon South Rim Village. And in Sean's slide, when he was talking about the Fred Harvey Company, that's where you're going to see the El Tovar Hotel, restaurants, and as well as historical interpretive signage and buildings. North Rim is a completely different experience. Of the 6 million plus people that visit the Grand Canyon annually, less than 100,000 visit the North Rim. And the North Rim's a little bit longer and harder to get to. It's an additional 300 miles on your journey. However, it is worth every single extra hour it takes to get there. It is absolutely spectacular, and it feels as though you're stepping back in time. Whereas the South Rim Village, there's a lot of hustle and bustle and a lot of things and people happening simultaneously. I saw a question in the chat, what's the best time of the year to visit? I would say the fall right now, because the Grand Canyon, as you walk deeper into the Grand Canyon, if you choose to hike into it, it gets warmer and warmer and warmer. During the summertime, high temperatures down at the river can exceed 120 degrees, which can take a toll on somebody. So I would say visit in the fall, try to beat the first snow because those trips are treacherous even without snow. But with snow, they become very treacherous. Yeah. And Sean, I don't know, do you want to add anything else?
Oh, I'll leap in and simply say that, you know, Grand Canyon is the ultimate road trip. And so depending on where you start your travels in the United States, if you're going across the Southwest, New Mexico and Arizona, you're going to be on Route 66 or the roads that have replaced it, or you're going to be riding the Amtrak, which follows the Santa Fe Railway. And so the trip to the Grand Canyon, the tourist trip, is a well-worn path, and it in itself is an experience. And like so many other places, sure, how much time and money do you have? You can while away days at the canyon with no difficulty, and the hotels are spectacular and the food service is good. So depending on what you're looking for, you know, if you're going to hike the canyon, there are endless trails. There are miles and miles and miles and miles of trails down to the river and back. So there's just tons of things to do. There is the Clark Griswold method of going to the rim and nodding your head for 5 minutes and getting back in the car and heading for Disneyland, but that's not what we really recommend.
I'd just like to add one additional thing. If you're interested in learning more about the indigenous communities, there's certainly some information at the South Rim Village, but if you really want to have a much more intimate experience learning about the indigenous communities that are connected to the Grand Canyon, I would recommend taking the hike down to Havasupai. It's a 7 or 8 mile hike down there, not too difficult in terms of the Grand Canyon hikes. However, you're rewarded by walking right into the Havasupai Village. And then just beyond the village, there are those, the Havasupai Falls, which you see a lot on Instagram and in other books, those emerald green waters and that amazing waterfall that just falls right into those emerald green waters. So that's a pretty fantastic trip if you get the chance to take it.
Fantastic, thanks for that.
Super, okay, found it, thank you.
So we're coming to a close of the session. There's been some additional links put in the comments box for those that you're interested. I just wanted to take this opportunity to once again to thank Angelina, Peter, Ted and Sean for that really interesting presentation.